I played a bunch more Armor Core since my last video, and I kind of wanted to give an update as my thoughts on the game had changed. I think the biggest thing to get used to if you're coming from a other FromSoft game is that this game is much more build dependent and less skill dependent than the FromSoft games. And I don't say that as an elitist thing. I just say that as a how I kind of feel about it. So in the FromSoft games, I think it's all about learning to dodge, learning when to block, learning when to attack. It's all about different windows and stuff like that. Well, in Dark Souls 1, you could kind of tank. They nerfed armor so heavily in 2 and 3, and obviously Bloodborne doesn't even have armor. It just kind of becomes almost purely cosmetic at that point. And you can't really trade DPS with bosses. I mean, I've done that before, and I've had some success doing it, but I feel it's very clearly pushing you towards a dex build and towards a build where you mostly dodge and you can't really take hits in significant numbers because combos will kill you. And it's not particularly hard compared to a lot of games of similar difficulty to figure out the boss's timings, to figure out when to dodge, when you can attack, stuff like that. It might take a couple of tries, but particularly when you're looking at something like DS1, the bosses don't have that many attacks, and once you get them down, they aren't exceedingly difficult. I mean, some of them are still hard. I think like Artorias is really hard in one, and there's some other difficult bosses, obviously, but you can once you get it down, it's doable. This game is much less skill based and much more build based. Like your armor is super important when you go from like a light armor core to a medium one to a heavy one. There's a massive difference in how much damage you take and how much HP you have in the type of weapons you can carry. And it's just, I find a lot more prevalent than it is in Dark Souls. And partially because you can completely reconfigure yourself. The game is balanced around that. So I find certain bosses will be almost impossible with certain builds. Like I went up against the I think it's called the cleaner or the furnace guy, and I basically ran out of ammo the first time I fought him. I just blew through all of it trying to damage him, and it didn't do anything. And then I switched up my build a bit, and then I beat him rather easily. And I find a lot of the bosses are almost like in the old Mega Man games, where you need a specific weapon or you need a specific stun lock combo or something, and then you can. I find like some of them it'll go from me raging and fighting them like 6 times in a row to me just blowing through them. I personally find the someone called it the brute force build, which is tank tracks, dual chain guns, and dual grenade launchers, and just stun locking. Works pretty well. So, like I said, that's something you have to get used to, and I find just bosses are very difficult to dodge because they have really big AoE, they have a lot of homing missiles and stuff like that, and it's often better to just try to tank it. So that's a big difference, and now that I've gotten a bit more used to that, I find the difficulty of the game a lot more manageable. I definitely think it's easier than the other FromSoft games. That being said, I think the bosses are generally speaking miserable. I haven't really enjoyed any of them. Even with the proper build, I feel a lot of them just have too much HP. A lot of them just are designed like Dark Souls bosses, but don't necessarily fit in the context of the gameplay style. Like I'm fighting the ice worm, and it's just a miserable experience because it pops out. You have to shoot it with a stun gun. The stun gun has like a full 1 to 2 second delay, and the worm like the opportunity window to shoot it is like 2 seconds, and it's very inaccurate. So you basically just have to be lucky that RNG is giving you the proper opening to shoot it, and then you don't have much time to do direct damage to it. And it's just a really miserable gimmick boss fight experience. It's not even necessarily like the difficulty, it's just long and boring. And that's how a lot of the bosses in these games is because they have so much health. Is some of them are just like you constantly shooting. When you're fighting other armor cores, they also have 3 repair kits, so you have to beat them basically 3 times because they keep reloading their ammunition. So I just think the bosses aren't good in this game. I don't think they're well designed. I don't think they're balanced based on the type of gameplay that you're doing. Also, a lot of the bosses, they don't. You have checkpoints in this game, so you spawn next to the boss. But to get to the boss rooms are often some of the longer levels in the game. So if you're like, oh, I can't beat the boss now, I'm going to come back. It takes a while to do that. I would say though the biggest. Okay, so there's that. Before we get to kind of the meta issues, one other thing I kind of get at is this game is janky. This game is janky as fuck. I find lock-on doesn't work particularly well a lot of the time, and you're dependent on it. Sometimes it'll just not lock on. Sometimes it'll just disengage. The game seems to really do whatever it wants, and it just does not feel particularly polished. And I've lost a lot of boss fights just because lock-on doesn't work. I don't know if that's I just don't understand it, if it's just super janky, if it's what it is, but I do often find that when I'm playing this game, lock-on doesn't work or the controls are just not particularly smooth. It can be a little trouble sometimes to get your mech to do what it's supposed to do. It's far from the worst game, but in a game that's very like high speed and you often will have limited ammo, it's very frustrating to just have the lock on disengaged, you completely miss your opponent, and then you have to wait like 6 seconds to recharge everything. I do think it's pretty janky with regards to that. I don't know, the controls are weird. Maybe that's just how Armored Core does it. It seems to alternate between being like silky smooth and really good and just being god awful and being difficult to like maneuver at all and like just a pain to try to hit things. I don't really know. Maybe there's some hidden stats I can't find. The game isn't particularly good at explaining how to play it. It's not, but some of it's intuitive, a lot of it really isn't. I also just don't think they give you enough money for missions, and I just get bored having to replay the same missions to grind. Because, like I said, a lot of bosses you need specific weapons for, and so you have to grind for it. And if you're not particularly good at the game and you die or you use a lot of ammo, it docks you a lot of money. Now, I get that the old ones had a debt system, which they thankfully removed, but I just really don't care for it. And I would prefer, if they were going to have a difficulty mode in this, that might be a good place to start, is just a multiplier for the amount of cash you get. I find it kind of tedious. The missions are fun the first time. I don't find it particularly fun to replay them. So that's kind of my general thoughts on the game. It's overall good. I just am kind of struggling to describe it. I do feel a general lack of polish. Like this could use some patching, just to kind of be smoother. It's kind of hard to describe because it's abstract, and I think the boss fights are complete and total garbage. And I don't think they're fun, and I don't think they're balanced. And now I kind of want to talk about the other half of Armored Core, and this is kind of my general issue, and I've complained about this many, many times with the FromSoft fanboys, is the whole get good mentality. A large portion of FromSoft fan base, or perhaps just an extremely vocal minority, doesn't want the average person to play their games. They want to gatekeep. They want to say casuals can't play Dark Souls. Casuals can't play Elden Ring. We don't want these games to be mainstream because if they're mainstream, that they're going to be bad. And I get to a certain extent that there's an artistic vision and they don't want it to be compromised. But a lot of the gatekeeping is like defending, oh, this game has... I remember when like this was about to come out, people were like, oh, I'm so excited. It's going to have janky controls. It's going to have bad collision detection. And it's just going to have all these like technical issues. And that's good because it means people won't want to play it. And I'm like, if it's the difficulty, I can kind of understand. But the whole like, I hope it has tech issues so people get pissed off and don't play it. Kind of summarizes a lot of the attitude that I get from them. And a lot of these games, be it the Souls games or this, with some kind of basic advice, like some strategy, maybe the boss is weak to this, maybe try this, does help out a lot. But I find whenever people ask for help, the overwhelming response is just to yell, get good autistically. And even if someone does try to give advice, people will just spam the thread. Like somebody like, oh, I'm struggling with the sea spider or whatever, and people will just yell, get good. They don't like say, why don't you try this build? Maybe these weapons are better. Maybe other people's experience is different, but I just find they scream, get good. Or you're not supposed to enjoy this game, or you're not supposed to play it. And an aspect of that, and it's something that really gets on my nerves, is the whole you have to play a FromSoft game in a very specific way, and if you don't, it's cheating, and if you don't, it's illegitimate. So the consensus I tend to see is you have to basically play the game as a Dex character with like no without taking damage. And if you don't play the game that way, then you didn't legitimately beat it. You can't use armor, you can't use magic, you can't use summons, you can't cheese the bosses. You can only play as a Dex character with no armor and like just dodge everything. And that's the attitude I tend to find. I find that with Armor Core too. Is a lot of people like, oh, if you're not using a reverse joint build and dodging everything and not doing any tanking and like I deliberately make the game harder by not using the proper weapon set, then it's not legitimate. You're not playing the game properly. And it's better if people don't explain what stuff is. It's better if we don't like explain like how builds work and stuff like that. And I find that's, if not the majority of the community, the very, very vocal minority is just people yelling, get good. You have to play a Dex build. You're not allowed to play the game you want the way you want to play it. And I know I shouldn't be looking at forums, but as I said, for a lot of these, finding a build that works, stuff like that is very important and does deal a lot with the difficulty scaling. Um, and like to me, that's I don't really think there is a way for these games to be played. I think if you make it to the end of a FromSoft game, I don't care if you summoned, if you used a Dex build, if you exploited bad AI, you legitimately beat the game. And it's like, once again, it's not even gatekeeping based on difficulty. It's not even gatekeeping based on artistic vision. It's literally we just don't want the average person to have fun playing these games. Like even if they can beat it with maybe a little bit of advice, or like in DS1, I had a friend who started playing it, and I just gave him like a bunch of advice. I'm like, this is what the different stats do. Resistance doesn't do anything. When in doubt, increase your health. If you're getting started in the game, shields block 100% physical damage. There's nothing wrong with relying on it. But if you have someone in a lot of like the forums and stuff who's like, I'm starting out, I'm having trouble, people will just scream, get good. They won't give any actual advice. StarCraft equivalent of this is macro better, wherein people will say, "Oh, just build more zealots," and like, how do zealots counter battle cruisers? And like, they just do. Just build more zealots, build more immortals, and you'll be able to beat mass sky toss or something like that. So those are my thoughts on the matter. I've kind of changed my mind a bit. I don't know if necessarily you need a difficulty setting from these. I do think that the economy should maybe be reworked and bosses should have their HP cut by like 30%, because I think there's too much HP in this. And this is a complaint I also had in Elden Ring. I don't think the difficulty of boss fights should be based on, oh, this dude has a ton of health. It's just a really long, grueling fight. You're going to run out of healing before they run out of health. I just don't like that. I don't think it's fun. I don't think it's fair. Overall, though, I do like the game. I think it needs some polish, and I think I just hate gimmick boss fights. I think the only gimmick boss fight I ever liked in a Souls game was in Demon Souls when you were fighting the Sky King or whatever, and you were shooting the tornadoes at him. But I, generally speaking, just really hate them. I don't think they're fun. I don't think they're interesting. Um, I think they're punishing to players who, once again, it's saying you have to play the game a very specific way, and if you have trouble with that, then fuck you. You just can't get through this part. There's been a number of games over the years I've quit. I can't think of one off the top of my head, just because I couldn't do a gimmick boss, or because I'm not fast enough to do a quick time event, and I literally just have to stop playing it, even if I was doing good at everything else in it. So those are my updated thoughts on Armor Core. I think it's a good game. It needs some TLC though, but nothing FromSoft makes is ever finished on release. They aren't like Paradox bad, but they're pretty bad. So that's my thoughts. God bless.